Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Sending everyone so much love as we go into this Memorial Day weekend. I hope that you will be safe. We're sending prayers to the two staffers from the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., who were shot and killed last night. May God bless them and their families. And there's just so much pain here, so much pain here. And we see that it has spilled onto America's shore. Indeed, the bombs that are dropped overseas, Dr. King said, would explode at home, and that's what we're beginning to see. But we've seen that with people who've had their dreams dashed, who have had job offers rescinded, who've been blacklisted, who've not received their degrees, and on and on and on and on. We need to give peace, love, and justice a chance. May God bless all of these people and the people who continue to be killed every day over in Gaza and the West Bank. God bless everyone. All right, everybody, let's get right to it. Let's talk about what so many people are talking about. The South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa. Indeed, he was Nelson Mandela's negotiator for the ANC. He's someone who has sterling credentials, someone who's gone on to become a successful businessman, but he has moved back into public life and he's the president of South Africa. And he has a broad base of support. That having been said, he has come to the United States to meet with President Trump because not only is Elon Musk accusing uh, that government of conducting a white genocide, which is absolutely untrue. These are not unverified reports, as you're hearing in corporate media. These are debunked reports. It is absolutely untrue. More than 19,000 people were killed between April of 2024 and the end of 2024. More than 19,000. 36 farmers, 7 of them were white. That is not a white genocide at all. Every loss of life is a tragedy, but that's not what this is. We do have a land expropriation bill, and we're going to talk about that. It was first drawn up in 1975, but of course, after apartheid, it was amended. It was amended. Some people said it wasn't specific enough, but it hadn't really responded to the changing times. And so there's a lot in it, everybody. There's a lot in it. But when you go to South Africa, and I've had the privilege of having gone there, you see the wide disparities in wealth. You see how Black people live. You see that colored and Indian and Asian people live together. So they are a little bit more middle class, but not necessarily. Um, More 81% of South Africa is Black African. 4% of Black Africans have the land, privately held land. More than 70%, nearly 3/4 of the privately held land is held by white people, farmers, corporations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you see, when you get there, you see a real an anger because people want change and they want it now. I mean, the poverty is grinding. It's grinding. And so there's something that needs to happen. And so with not just Elon Musk, but Peter Thiel and a whole coterie of South Africans who do surround President Trump at this time, he has been pushed to bring in so-called white refugees, white Afrikaners. Now that's odd, given that we are pushing really people who are indigenous to the Americans, brown people, Black people from the Caribbean, we're pushing them out of the United States. We won't grant them refugee status, but people who are not facing a genocide, who really are aggrieved because there is land that needs to be returned to the indigenous peoples. There's land that the government needs. Well, there's pushback on that. And so I've just given you like the broad outlines, and I want to hear what your thoughts are. 81% of South Africa is Black, 4% of the land is owned by Black people. 7% of South Africa is white. 3/4 of the land is owned by white people. So, no, what do you think about that? And what do you think about Afrikaners being resettled in the United States? How will that work out for us socially? We got to talk about that because I'm wondering they can't help but bring their grievances at aggrieved cells here. How will that wash with Americans? Let's talk about it here on the Santita Jackson Show. Please meet me on Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social, santitajackson.bsky.social. I'm also on X at SantitaJ, and the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. Please go there. That's where I can accept friends. And that's right. Hey, Robert and Mike, you're over there on the Santita Jackson and Friends page, but Bernadette is on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, everybody. Please get over there. But let's talk about it. Let me first hear from you, Dr. Gibbs. What do you make of this? You're an historian. And of course, your book, The Revolt of the Rich, everybody needs to get it, but you need to help me to understand. That having been said, we know we've got the revolt of the Afrikaners, and they're here in the United States. Not all of them, but that signal that was sent to bring them into the United States, it just doesn't sit well with so many Americans. What do you make of all this and the confrontation that they had in the White House yesterday? And it wasn't a confrontation. What it was, uh, the South African president was not treated hospitably, respectfully, diplomatically. They lowered the lights and played a video from a right-wing group that really exploited and it's from 2020, the words of Julius Malema, who is someone who's really beloved on the ground, someone who's, they call him so-called to the left, but he's someone who is 10 toes down on returning the land and having blacks get their wealth. A term, kill the Boer, which was the white farmer. That's unfortunate, but everybody doesn't come from the nonviolent part of the movement like Dr. King and Reverend Jackson do. That having been said, they were not looking to kill people, and that is not what they have done. That is not what they have done. So, Dr. David Gibbs, you're an historian. Help me to understand what we saw, and particularly with how a guest, a head of state, was treated in the White House yesterday. Have you ever seen anything like lower the lights and let's take a look at this?
Well, the background of this, of course, is the days of apartheid under South Africa. Basically, minority white rule. I believe in the days of apartheid, before it began to transition in 1990, was based on rule, both political and economic rule, by a white minority, which I think was back in the days of apartheid higher than it is now. I think it was 15, 17% of the population ruling over the over 80% that was predominantly African. Now, most of the whites have left. I believe more than half the whites have left. A lot of them had two passports and have gone elsewhere. But 7% of the population of South Africa now is white, and they do control. I believe the figure I've seen, if I'm correct, is 70% of the land. And that's a legacy of apartheid. That was done by force. That was achieved by force. The idea that we're seeing here as a genocide is absolutely preposterous. That's an utterly ridiculous use of the word genocide. It has nothing to do with reality whatsoever. It discredits the whole word genocide to misuse it that way. And so, this is what's going on in South Africa is something that's long overdue. I think that one can legitimately criticize the ANC, and has been criticized, for dragging its feet on the issue of economic change. It overthrew the political legacy of apartheid. They achieved one person, one vote, but they did not really overturn, not substantially anyway, the economic legacy of apartheid, which really had to be dealt with and is now finally, belatedly being dealt with, maybe a little less forcefully than it should be, in my view. And so the basic, no doubt there are failures in the way it's being implemented, the land law, but the basic idea that you need to basically overcome this legacy of seizure of land by force historically, the fact that a racial minority owns most of the land, that obviously had to change. And so there's no legitimate basis to fundamentally criticize what's going on in South Africa in terms of the land situation, in my view. what's going on domestically in the United States is you are seeing Trump having a displaying a very disturbing side of himself and of his movement. We've seen it before with Trump's positive statements about Nick Fuentes and other things like that. In Charlottesville, we saw it in, I think, 2017. And so you do indeed have an element within the MAGA movement that is, in the proper sense of the term, white supremacist. On the other hand, I'm a little bit surprised about this because, as is well known, we discussed it on the show here, Trump was making inroads into communities of color, and a sizable number of non-white people voted for Trump in this last election, including over 40% of Hispanics and particularly also African-American men, a sizable number. I think the number that I have in my head is 24% of African-American men did vote for Trump. Let me say I think they made a mistake personally, but from the standpoint of Trump, I'm surprised that he's going so far out on a limb and taking such an obviously racist position. And that basically this is alienating a significant number of people who voted for him. But he's doing that all the same, and perhaps he's showing his true colors. That's although you could say he's been showing his true colors all along, and people just chose to turn their head away from it. And this is, and the event in the White House is consistent with Trump's general tendency to completely set aside all standards of diplomacy and just act like he's acting maybe in a bar or something like that, and just insulting people publicly. He seems to enjoy doing that. We haven't seen that really in the White House before, at least not in a diplomatic event. But one of the features of Trump definitely is to set aside all standards of dignified conduct, and he put that fully on display with Ramaphosa. I thought Ramaphosa dealt with it rather well as he could under the circumstances. Bottom line, though, is that there's an extraordinary inconsistency here. Trump, the whole idea of "Make America Great Again," is anti-immigrant. He doesn't want immigrants coming to the United States from other countries, and here he is letting white South Afrikaners into the United States as persecuted minorities. Well, they are a minority, clearly, but persecuted when they own 70% of the land? I don't think so. And so, this is something that is putting on display for the country and the world a disturbing side of American culture.
Well, I saw one of these TikTok videos, and I believe it was a young lady from South Africa. She said, but America is the perfect place for the Afrikaners, given America's history and given who you have as president now. And it is very interesting because when you look at President Trump's record, he's been very careful about excluding saying offensive things to African Americans in particular. That doesn't make me feel any better, but it's just he's been very precise. But with this, this is very disturbing, and he's being pushed to do this by Elon Musk, but Peter Thiel, because he has a whole group of South Africans, of Afrikaners who are around him. And David Sachs, it's so many of them. I mean, and many of us don't know. I mean, and they are among his closest advisors and biggest contributors. So, I mean, what do you read into it?
Yeah, it could be that the South African billionaire group here is a significant influence on him with regard to this specific issue. Elon Musk does seem to be fading somewhat from the picture, but I don't think he's publicly. But nevertheless, I think it does reflect the fact that Trump does seem to have an affection for the Afrikaners, and not in a positive way, that's for sure. And so I don't know what else to say about it other than that this is something that's going to be very disturbing that we have in American society that have been suppressed somewhat for some years now, but is now coming out. The genie is out of the bottle. And it's very hard to put the genie back into the bottle once it's out. This is, well, Trump has said this before. Once he said something about, why can't we get more immigrants from places like Norway?
Yes.
And, what does he mean by that? I think everybody knows what he means by that. And so it's, he does seem to want a white base. He has a white base. As I said before, it's not entirely white. That's certainly true, but he does seem to be appealing to that white base in a very disreputable way. Let's just put it that way.
Attorney C.K. Hoffler, you've had a tremendous amount of experience. Of course, you are on Court TV every week, and you have your own radio show on WAOK in Atlanta every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Let me get that out of the way always, Chair of Rainbow Push. And we do hope that you'll be coming to our convention, June 12th, 13th, and 14th in Chicago. The Rainbow Push Conference is going to be something wonderful. We need to come together and have some conversations and really have points of action about what it is that we need to do. You can't wait 2 years, 4 years to figure out how we're going to overcome these Medicare and Medicaid cuts, Social Security cuts, and what's happening with our domestic and international policies. But what do you make of this? You spent a lot of time, Dr. Gibbs. She has worked on the continent of Africa for many, many years, since the beginning of her practice as a lawyer. And one of the things that's been most impressive, beyond the fact that Reverend Jackson took you to the continent with him numerous times to be an interpreter, but you had also had tremendous experience as these nations moved into freedom, helping them to draft their charters and such, and really helping them to steer the imperfect path to freedom. Let's put it that way. So or should I say, the path to freedom is perfect. We're not.
Yes.
Let me correct myself. So that having been said, what did you make of the meeting first, and the reasons behind it, particularly as it comes to land expropriation?
Well, Santita, I expected nothing more than what we saw from the meeting with our president. If we look at how the table has been set as it relates to South Africa, we've talked about the very, very close allies, political allies, financiers of President Trump. So who are South African, who are white South African, who are Afrikaner South African. So I didn't expect that that the Trump administration's policy would reflect anything other than something consistent with his loyalty to them. And this is very consistent with what he announced his policy was going to be during his first term. He made it very clear during his first term that he disfavored people, Black people, brown people coming from the continent of Africa, which I think he characterized as one country, by the way. So it is of no surprise to me that the president of South Africa was received so poorly. It was embarrassing to me. It was humiliating to me. It was unfortunate. It was awful. It was not the way that you treat a head of state. But having said that, the way that the president treated the president of Ukraine is not the way that you treat a head of state either. So when we think of our foreign policy at this moment, I think our foreign policy is on a collision course. But as it relates to South Africa in particular, I was not surprised. I was dismayed and maybe even disgusted, but I wasn't surprised because there are financial interests that are at issue. It's really all about the money. As it relates to South Africa and its journey, the first time I visited South Africa was actually in before the fall of the apartheid regime. Mm-hmm. So I remember, and I've been there several times, a couple of times with your dad, but even before going with your dad, several times before. And I remembered when I was in college writing about Reagan's policy of constructive engagement. So I've always followed, and I was at University of Geneva at the time, I've always followed the plight of the South Africans, mm-hmm. Black South Africans, and just the country because of the nexus and the role that the U.S. was playing both destructively mm-hmm. and constructively in terms of bringing down the apartheid regime. And so at the time, Santita, and I have to give this historical perspective, you had, our iconic leaders like your dad, like Randall Robinson, like Charles Ogletree, a whole group of people, some of who are still with us and some of who are not, unfortunately, who played a very significant role in mobilizing corporate America to take a position that ultimately helped to lead to the fall of the apartheid regime. Mm-hmm. But the fall of that regime and Nelson Mandela becoming president, getting out of jail, coming to president, we all know that history. Well, we don't all know, but certainly many of us know that history was just step number one.
Mm-hmm.
Financial independence is and the ability to spread more of the wealth amongst the people. The South African, as you said, 75% of the country or more is comprised of people of color, no, Black people, and the rest people of color. And there's a huge disparity between even those in power, Black South Africans and Afrikaners. Huge disparity. And then there are other groups that are in the middle. And of course, you're always going to find in any society eminently wealthy Black folks and eminently poor white folks. I mean, that's what you're going to find in any society.
But hold on, because that is, in the post-slavery era, and even now as we've experienced new freedoms, people are selected to be that one exception, that one wealthy Black person, or a couple of them, or a group of them. But the so-called best of us don't save the rest of us. And that's what they're seeing in South Africa on a massive scale, right?
On a massive scale, more than any other place that I've seen in the world. But what I'm saying is those trends are societal trends. That's what happens, whether selected or however, that's what happens. But in South Africa, the disparity is so pronounced, and the disparity in living conditions so pronounced. So when you have
wait a minute, but I think before you go, I think people need to understand just how pronounced what Soweto looks like. Soweto has an upper class area, but the overwhelming majority of Black people live in a grinding poverty. Many of them don't even have indoor plumbing.
Running water, things that even in our poorest communities in this country we have.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize, if you haven't visited South Africa is one of the most beautiful countries on the planet. There are people living in South Africa that, in terms of their wealth, rival the wealth that we have here in the United States at the top echelons. So you might have Cape Town, for instance, actually throughout South Africa, that is the case. So you've got South Africa, while it is on the continent and people think that it's a developing country, it actually technically is not what we would call a developing country, such as other countries on the continent. And that needs to be clear. You just have to visit South Africa to recognize that, whether it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or today. But the disparities exist. Soweto, for instance, that where you indicated, that's where Nelson Mandela's house was.
Winnie Mandela.
And Winnie Mandela famously, as many know, when Nelson Mandela was in prison, she held down the fort, and people would come to their home in Soweto. So I think that what people need to recognize is there are always people that live, middle class, upper middle class, and upper middle class conditions.
Wealthy.
But the other conditions, almost side by side, reminded me of Cote d'Ivoire and Yamoussoukro. Side by side, you have places where there's no indoor plumbing. There might not be any outdoor plumbing. So it's the disparities you just don't envision in a country that is so industrialized as South Africa globally, that people would be living in those conditions, because even in our worst areas here in the US, whether rural or urban, the conditions are not that way.
Except for the Mississippi Delta and parts of Appalachia.
Well,
I mean, we have that, but
bad. I think they're bad, but they're still not as bad as in some parts of South Africa. So that's what I'm saying. Yes, we have poverty here in the US. Yes, we have conditions that are atrocious, that shouldn't exist, given that we are a superpower and given all that that this country potentially can offer. But in South Africa, that disparity is greater and those conditions are worse. So I'm not surprised, just to bring to close this train of thought, I'm not surprised. I think that there is a strong movement globally for white Afrikaners to come back and in their mind to reclaim what they feel they were, what was taken away from them. But as you said in the beginning, in terms of land ownership, the majority of the land is not owned by
Mhm.
Black people. But power, what the difference that you do see is in terms of the power, who is president and who is in within the echelons of power. And that's what they're trying to reclaim, because if they reclaim that completely, then all the other stuff that people feel that have they've been robbed of, which is not correct in my assessment, they will get back. So this is as much about money and power as it is anything. And just as we've seen with this president, that resonates with him. So he's of course going to condemn the president of South Africa for coming over here. South Africa was one of the first countries on the continent to take a very, very, very strong position against President Biden's a war on Gaza, his position in Gaza.
Well,
So,
and to your point, many people feel that the subtext of that was also that because the Western world, just as the Western world has not forgiven Haiti
mhm,
for beating a white power,
the
the
French.
fact that this Black nation would take on the United States and Israel and the Mideast question and specifically call out the genocide.
Mhm.
Many people have said, you know what? I think underneath all of this is that too.
I
You
think it's.
know,
I think you're correct. I think it's all of the above. But even if you just looked at, if you put that aside, I think that President Trump's position as it relates to the South African government would still be the same way, because
mhm,
fundamentally he opposes everything that is South Africa in terms of it being a Black controlled
mhm,
government, because of how financially it has impacted people who are his allies. I mean, it's just a business. It's everything really in that sense is transactional. So while yes, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of our position globally, our president, has taken many positions that are quite frankly embarrassing and I think atrocious, but they are consistent with where he has said he is going to be on foreign policy. It is not surprising that we have allowed white South Africans, Afrikaners
mhm,
in. We are paying money to go get them and all that. That is completely consistent
mhm.
with his immigration policy, which is a policy to disfavor Black and Brown people. Completely consistent. Because
Sure.
these are not Black and Brown people. These are Afrikaners. These are white people. So I'm just saying nothing was surprising to me, Santita. Was it embarrassing? Yes. Was it humiliating to watch? Yes. Did I expect anything different? No.
Well, and it's consistent. It's consistent with the West. I mean, because we see France has this position. This is the problem they're having with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And the Francophone countries in Africa are pushing back. African countries, it's not going to be easy, but they're pushing back against the European powers. And the European powers are pushing forward because the source of their wealth is in Africa and is to a lesser extent, but no less impactful, in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they get the minerals. Everything that we use in the West has to come from Africa. It does. So, Attorney Darrell Jones, of course, you are on WOLDC along with Attorney Barbara Arnwine every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Let's just go back to the meeting before we move forward through everything else, because I think the meeting, I was I had the feeling that was going to happen, even though he had two world renowned golfers with him. He had a white billionaire with him who is supportive of the Ramaphosa regime. You had all of that, and he's even and he said kind of cheekily, "Well, maybe if I gave you a plane." I said, "Oh, that was rich," but that was insulting. Although I wouldn't quite put it on the same in the same space as Zelensky, because Zelensky came really demanding money, not asking for it, but where is it? And that is not what Ramaphosa came to do. He said no, there because Elon Musk has reached out to. He's reached out to Elon Musk. He's like, wait a minute. He's come here to to further dispel the lie that there's a white genocide happening. And you've got the G20 that's about to meet there. I mean, there's so much that's on the table right now, right? And they have been taking incoming fire, and it has been serious because many of their top officials have been threatened by the Netanyahu government. So I mean, they're in a very, very they're on the world stage now, and they're in a very, very interesting position. So what did you first? What was your reaction to the meeting? That's what I want to know first.
Santita, I've got to say that my initial reaction to the meeting was that I was unfortunately not surprised. I was unfortunately not surprised. It was an opportunity for for President Trump, to really lift up, the South Africa, to lift up the country above the negativity that everything has been viewed going into it. But what he did
Whose
was
country?
he played
South Africa or ours? which
the,
country?
the United States, the United States.
Okay.
But what he ended up doing was, a through line, right, with what he's been doing all along. And what I mean by that is, from the phraseology of "Make America Great," the whole concept that's there was that, if we can get rid of this DEI stuff, right, move these unqualified Black people, brown people out of the way, then these qualified white people would be able to do all of this stuff, and we can make America great again. That's no different than what we hear happening from his messaging with regards to South Africa. And that is that, the problem is that the Black people, right, are in charge there, and they're killing the white people. If you just let the white people back in charge, South Africa would be great again. And there's a consistency, I think, with the messaging that's being laid out there. One of the things that I think CK was saying a little earlier with regards to the showing of the film and everything that was happening and lower the lights, really that was like one of those Tim Russert moments, right? Where you're supposed to lower the lights, show the film, and this, this president of South Africa.
Hold on, stay right there. Wait. Because he gave more credence to the white golfers and the white billionaire, to their testimonies, than he did to the president of the country, Daryl.
Yeah. Because he doesn't. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well,
Not school.
No.
No, Daryl, please continue. Then you jump right on in.
No, but that further underscores and highlights what I'm saying, right? That the concept is that, if it's coming from someone that is white, then it's something that is believable. If it's coming from a person of color, it's not. And that's what he has highlighted throughout his time, from his run to office to where he is today. That's what he's highlighted, and that's what he's pushed forward. And I think that's that's what's being displayed, and what you saw being displayed in the White House. Why was it that the South African president, the president of South Africa, needed to bring white people with him in order for him to be believed, in order for him to be legitimate? He had to bring white folks with him to say, what I'm saying is accurate. What I'm saying is real. What I'm saying is what's actually happening in the country. That's the president that we have right now in the United States. That he wasn't going to believe what the Black man had to say, and that's really, I call it that three line, because that's what he displayed himself to be with his whole slogan of "Make America Great." That's what he's displayed again with the anti-DEI. That's what he's displayed again consistently, and he's showing it now with the treatment and how he treated the president of South Africa, Santita.
Well, I mean, so where do we go from here? Because really because I think I see a couple of things at play. The land expropriation and the Middle East. First, with land expropriation, I think everyone needs to be clear. I was reading a wonderful book by an Irish Republican, someone from Northern Ireland. And of course, they're still engaged with the crown for their own sovereignty. In fact, they pay more money to the UK, to the British crown, than the French have paid, than the Haitian have paid to the French, which is part of the reason that when they're over there, they absolutely relate to the Black struggles, right? And all the freedom struggles. They really are true allies over there. When they get to the United States, whiteness takes over, and then there's that. That having been said, you've got they have paid the price for daring to be free and then daring to take on two major powers of the world on behalf of a vulnerable population. I don't think that we can overstate that, because I felt that there were two struggles happening at the same time. Because even as I was watching this reporting, uh, Attorney Jones and Attorney Hoffler, it was very interesting to hear the pundits and the reporters, because they had Black South African commentators and journalists, which was wonderful to see, right? And they would talk about, and they just casually, not casually, but pointedly spoke of the genocide and their fight against that and all of that. And then, of course, Jake Tapper reliably said, well, of course, that has been debunked. And then I was like, no, it's not. The ICC has just about ruled in their favor. They're just taking a little bit more time. Don't know. But I heard several other pundits say that before they could even talk about the insult and what's happening in South Africa. And so, so where do we go from here with all of this? Because, Daryl, land is the source of wealth in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's why what BlackRock is doing in the United States is so dangerous, because they're turning America into a country of renters. They are buying up houses so they are unaffordable. A house that even 20 years ago cost $100,000 now costs $400,000. A mortgage that you paid 20 years ago, when you paid $1,000 plus for a mortgage 20 years ago, now you pay $3.5, $4. Wow. When I look at one of my favorite shows, CK, I watch HGTV. That kind of relaxes me. I love it. And what's interesting is to see how much houses in the United States cost. I said, well, wait a minute. This is not a big house. This is
even the small houses. If you watch that show, Small Houses or Tiny Houses,
yeah,
even those little tiny houses that I couldn't fit my leg into. That's just me, because or definitely not my derriere into. Walking in sideways. They're called tiny.
Wait a minute, but CK, with the tiny houses, you don't own land.
Yeah.
You live in a trailer park.
Yeah.
CK, wait a minute. Hold on. Tiny houses, you don't own land. But what makes America unique among the industrialized nations, the American dream, is that we are homeowners. And you owned the land upon which your house sat. So if you struck oil like the Beverly Hillbillies up under your basement, it is yours.
Yeah.
That's what makes us unique. But we're losing that. We're losing that access to wealth, Daryl. And so much of it's being transferred, yes, to BlackRock. So what do we do? What is our takeaway with what we saw happen with the president of South Africa? And this is a nation that is. It is a so-called first world nation, if you will. It is. And when you go there and you see it and you understand why whites would not leave, there is no country on earth, CK, you are right, that is more beautiful than South Africa. Cape Town is San Francisco on steroids.
What San Francisco used to be.
Well, excuse me. That's right. I'm just saying topographically, just geographically, what it looks like is beautiful. That having been said, what's next? Because to me, there was so much else going on, Daryl. It was the personal insults, but I had to put that aside and say, okay, we're talking about land ownership, but we're also looking at these people are still angry that they had the nerve to take, essentially, by proxy, the United States and the Gaza question to the highest court in the world. So, what do you make of that, Daryl?
Yeah, number one, I applaud what the South African leadership has done. and having the temerity to say, we're going to stand on our principle. What we believe that you have done is wrong, and we're going to take you to the World Court to address it. We're not backing down. They understood full well the wealth that was around them and the issues and the pressure that would be coming at them. But, they believed, in my mind, that their principle, their moral belief of what was the right thing to do outweighed what they knew that the United States, Israel, and its allies would do to them as a result of their action. So you've got to respect the fact that they had the integrity to stick to their principles and to go forward with it. The question then becomes, how do we support those that are supportive of that? How do we support them? What do we do to show that we can stand as they stand in principle, in morality, and push forward for what is right and what we believe to be the right thing to do? And I think a part of that certainly comes, we opened up, and I think it was a Professor Gibbs that said that 25% of Black men supported President Trump in this election. I think a large part of it comes from who we elect to be the figurehead, to lead the policy decisions for our country. And so, a large part of it has got to come from the head. If we can support and put in place a president that has that ability to have a much global, larger, inclusive view of doing the right things, I think that's a part of the answer that's in place. It's unfortunate when we run into a situation where we have a president that surrounded himself with these Afrikaners that are around the White House, Elon Musk, the Teals, et cetera, that are around the White House. And when the South African president's coming in, they know the discussion is going to be about Starlink, about Musk access to Starlink and being able to do that in the country of South Africa. And they're trying to strike a deal before they even come in. We've got to be certain that we're taking positions, that we're putting people in places and elected positions that will be consistent with what we want to see happen, consistent with the principles that we stand for, consistent for with the policies that we stand for as a people. That's what I think the beginning part of it is. And where we are right now, given the presidency that we have, if your position is consistent with what all I've heard from all the panelists on this show, our next focus then has got to be on pushing for the 2026 election and trying to get people in place that will try to curb, to control, and contain what we see happening in the White House now that we do not like, Santita.
But I think we also have to go probe even more deeply, Attorney Darrell Jones and Attorney C.K. Hoffler, because Elon Musk was allied with the Democrats until he was not invited to an event at the White House during the Biden administration. These people are fluid.
Yeah.
I mean, they will align themselves with power because it's business, okay? So my bigger question is, how did all of these South Africans get into the country in the first place and really overtake Silicon Valley? And so, like the Nazis, we brought the Nazis in after the Second World War. Now, I'm not equating the two, but as a white Afrikaner, I've got an issue with you. I do. But they're here, and they were going to be here. While I think that the president is ill-mannered, no question. To me, the deeper issue is, how did these people get here and what are they doing? Because I don't see I don't see the Democrats or the Republicans pushing back seriously against this white South African cabal, I'll put it that way, who are here in the United States. They're here. They are here, and they would have lobbied these people. They would have lobbied the Elon Musks and the Peter Thiels and on and on and on and on. They would have lobbied on behalf of the white Afrikaners, no matter who was in office. And I don't want us to be distracted by manners. To me, there's something deeper going on here. And I'm trying to see how we can advocate for a people who are 81% of the population who own 4% of their own land. What is this? I mean, CK, how do you, just constitutionally, how do you deal with that? And of course, the president was going to bring in these credible white people because he knew who he was dealing with. All black folks, we know how we have to negotiate to make it through, this world. Sometimes, sadly, you have to bring white people with you when you're meeting with black folks. Such is the mindset of people who have been brainwashed by this supremacist thinking. CK. So where do we go from here? Because this is, I'm concerned about the policy.
Well, you have every reason to be concerned about the policy. It's a bad policy. But we've been in this.
I need you to come in a little closer so we can hear you a little loud. Yeah.
I'm sorry. You have every reason to be concerned about the policy because our policy is a bad policy. But at the time, I thought that Reagan's policy in 1982 on constructive engagement was also a bad policy.
It was horrible.
It was also bad policy, but that was our policy. So we have been in this bad policy space as relates to South Africa for a long time. The difference is, of course, this is post-apartheid. So there hasn't been the progress, but this is not surprising. So where do we go from here? I think the South African government, like they're doing, the president, they've got to keep on their journey. South Africa has so much growth yet in front of it, ahead of it. It's always going to have issues addressing the color question, because like Angola and other Southern African nations that had a similar trajectory, they may not have called it apartheid, but colonization is apartheid, is discrimination, is segregation. It's all the same thing to me. And so when you have countries that historically, legally divided people and accorded them rights according to the color of their skin. What do I mean by that? Wasn't just black or white. If you were black, there was one, usually you didn't have rights. If you were full white, 100% white, you had all the rights. And depending upon the percentage of white blood you had in your body, and this was not too long ago, 30, 40 years ago, you were accorded greater rights. So if you were 50% white, you had more rights than somebody who was a fourth white. All of these things legally within the law. So when you're building upon countries that have had that legal structure that they've had to tear down, they've had to modify, they've had to change, there's a lot of work ahead. But the great thing is we've got presidents like the current president of South Africa who have the bandwidth. He was there with Nelson Mandela, like many of the former Black South African leaders were, that came from the ANC. He has a historical perspective and he's a business person. Because at the end of the day, one of the things that every president of every country is trying to do is to attract more business, to build the collective wealth of the country. And in this case, to include more Black people in that wealth building. So he's going to go on about his journey. He's going to continue to form alliances with different countries. And he's going to remember that this is what the U.S. position is. But even if the president's position were worse than it is, but I can't imagine anything worse, he's going to have to still recognize the United States and the status of the United States because of the fact that it's a global superpower. And that's the reality. You have to, on some level, kiss the ring. You don't have to agree with the ring. You don't have to bow down. You don't have to engage in servitude and slavery, but you got to kiss the ring in a way that's tolerable, even if you have to hold your nose and go on about your business and do the business of the country. That's why I think they go from here. I think that as it has been the case, thanks to many of the efforts of your father and others, there's a continuous opening of opportunity for African Americans to continue to go and do business in South Africa. That hasn't changed. That has increased over the years. Some years more than others. There's a very, very, very large African American community doing business, and that's established in South Africa, larger than perhaps any other of the countries on the continent I'm aware of. So business interests, forging the alliances have to continue. Many of us weren't surprised. We weren't surprised on this call, but I think they have to go forward with their agenda, with their policy initiatives, because South Africa is emerging as a real policy player globally, and they've got to continue on that trajectory. Some of the positions they've taken, they dared to take. And they've been supported by the international community. Maybe not the United States, but the United States is not the only player in the international community that is ever evolving. So I think the president does what he's doing. He's remaining focused. And when you go to meetings, you take different people to meetings based on what you have to do. And that's what he did. He knew he was going to confront exactly what he confronted, because if there's one thing that we know that they know, is that they're very well informed on what to expect. No surprises there. They've got a South African ambassador who's very adept. They've got a lot of people that completely briefed him. He knew what he was going to expect. You just have to try to neutralize some of the negativity and come out with the best resolution possible, even if your back is up against the wall and the resolution isn't going to be great. And that's what happened. He knew he was going to be insulted. He knew he was going to be offended. By the way, some of these head of state from Africa have been insulted by Democratic leaders who didn't realize they were insulting him. So, so I think it's all relative, but they got to stay the course.
Absolutely. I've got about a minute here. We're going to be continuing this discussion in the next hour. We're going to have Congressman Jonathan Jackson. He'll be able to tell us what happened on the floor of the Congress and what we can expect from this big, beautiful bill, tongue in cheek, but what he thinks, because he's on foreign relations. I know he's got some thoughts about what happened with President Ramaphosa on his Oval Office visit. The last minute belongs to you, Attorney Darrell Jones.
Thank you, Santita. I think that one of the things, and CK is 100% on point with regards to what the South African leadership must do in order to accomplish their goals. And I think that, one of the things that we saw that was clearly on display, folks talk about the attitude, the gracefulness with which the South African president handled the situation that was being thrown at him. But I would also add that when the South African president talked about him not offering a plane to President Trump, I don't have a plane to offer you. I didn't take that lightly. I took that as to say, you're looking for gifts. I need to give you gifts in order for you, what I come bearing to the king, so that the king can go ahead and do and listen and have the conversation with me. That's troubling. One of the gifts that the South African government has, and that people will start paying attention to, is they have something called nickel. That the nickel mineral that is used for the electric vehicles, that Elon Musk in the future of all these electric, that nickel farming is going to be one of the tools that they're going to be able to use, I think, with regards to the negotiations as they go forward from here on in, Santita.
Well, we have the resources. We don't need aid. We need trade. But you've got to get all of these people, because you still have a lot of European powers, and America is in that, who have their hands wrapped around the levers of power still. And you see that. That's probably one of the most frustrating aspects of our visits to the continent. We would see that, because they would be very awfully nervous when Reverend would show up. But there you go. We're going to talk about this in the next hour of the Santita Jackson Show, back in just a few minutes here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.